So here's where we're at. Here is the Doom mask. This is all made out of EVA foam between the floor mats, various thicknesses of like the fun foam, craft foam, 2 millimeter, 4 millimeter, 2 millimeter, 4 millimeter, and I think I have some 6 and 8 in here. All the little circly bits are actually googly eyes. Thing about googly eyes though, using them as rivets, they look awesome and they make nice uniform circles, but I don't know if you guys can hear it. Sounds like a little baby maraca, which hopefully doesn't drive him nuts. So to get to this point, made the mask, and prior to starting any of my paint, I hit it with my heat gun to seal the cells in the foam. Then I used Plastidip, which is a rubberized coating. I like the spray can form. It comes in lots of different colors. I was actually using up a bunch of little cans for this guy. So there's a couple layers of gray, there's a couple layers of white, and some black ones. Color doesn't generally matter, especially because I usually do a base coat of whatever color I'm going towards with like a rattle can. And I put on probably a good 4 to 5 layers of this guy. Once I got that done and dried, then I hit it with a slate gunmetal kind of silver Rust-Oleum rattle can. And I hit that with 2 coats, and this is where we're at, which looks cool, but we can do better. That's one of the things I find about a lot of costumes and a lot of cosplays that people make is they have an awesome build and they're so close, but there's just something that looks not quite finished. It's because they don't weather it. Even if it's a lot of times some of the more clean designs, like my Doom mask, I'm probably not gonna really like drag it through the mud like I did with my Skyrim build, because imagine Dr. Doom is a little dirty, but he's not like forging through Skyrim in the mud and riding on horses and killing dragons dirty. So adding that bit of detail with the weathering will make a huge difference. And I'm going to show you guys how I do that. So next clip, I'm going to cut over to how exactly I'm going to paint this guy. Just some foreshadowing. It's lots and lots of layers. All right, so we have our base coat. What we're going to do next is I am going to go through and start hitting some of the mid-tone areas. One of my favorites to use is actually, the pour bottle is so destroyed. It is this Martha Stewart metallic acrylic paint. This is in the color Brushed Pewter. And so this I love as like a nice mid-tone paint. And life hack, I like to use Frisbees for my palettes, for my paint. My dogs don't like it because then I'm stealing their Frisbees, but it works really nicely for putting your paint in, because then you can mix it amongst itself and you aren't. I do use those little flowery type ones. This one's filthy dirty. If, say, the colors do need to be really exact, but, or if I'm using like oil-based. But for acrylics, this guy is my favorite. And then I'm gonna go in, and I tend to use a lot of just really cheap brushes, and I'll kind of abuse them until I use them up. So I'm going to take this pewter color, and I'm pretty much going to hit just about everywhere with it, because I like that irony gunmetal gray, but it is a little dark for my taste. So I'm gonna go through and pretty much just cover this in a good little layer. And I may hit some of these areas first to see if I like a multi-metal effect. I don't really have much of a game plan going into this. And so the idea of having different types of metal in this may end up working out pretty nicely. I think I am liking that two-tone. So I think I'm going to leave the rest of the slate gray alone for now. Push that brush off a little bit. And actually, what I think, because I think I am going to do a little bit of rust on this. Not a lot, because he hasn't been out fighting dragons, but I imagine that he's kind of seen some stuff. So I am going to add a little bit of rust to him. And I think I'm going to start to add some of that now while that slate gray dries. So for rust, cheap old Americana. This is light cinnamon. I'm gonna add a little bit of this guy. I'm gonna try not to go overboard because you're really not gonna need a ton of rust unless you're going for super rusty. But I'm gonna try to reel it in. And I'm adding just a little bit of burnt umber to that to darken it up just a smidge. Just a smidge. And this is where I'm going over to, it's off camera, but I have a paper towel over here and I'm actually blotting off a lot of that because you want to go in with kind of a light hand because you're just wanting to barely add. And so think too about the direction. So since this is a mask, it would be worn upright. And so if you think about like if metal water is getting on there and carrying the product, the rust down with it, or you're gonna have drips underneath things, which are gonna be what holds the rust in. So you want to think about what direction those are going to go. Those rust stains are generally not going to go against gravity. They're going to fall with gravity. So I'm going to look at some of like these rivets here and just going to barely, and like I said, we'll see if this shows up. There we go. And same thing with some of these seams. It's the other thing too, is you don't want to be too precise and too uniform with this, because otherwise it defeats the purpose. One of the hardest things about doing things that look organic is trying to make things ununiform and not symmetrical, because your brain wants everything to match. But that's not how nature works. I'm thinking next we will go over this whole thing with a black wash. Let's see if, ooh, too dark. There, that's showing up a little bit better. All right, so I'm gonna let these layers dry, because I did put a pretty, most of the rust is already dried by now, because acrylic, the nice thing about acrylic is it dries pretty doggone fast. But I laid a pretty heavy layer of that slate on there, and so I'm gonna let that really dry pretty darn well before I go ahead and move on to my next step. All right, so my slate is pretty well dried. So what we're gonna do next is we're gonna move on to a black wash. Just using a basics, I believe this is the slate. It does not say. It's a basics black acrylic. Squeeze out a little bit of that. And then I'm gonna water it down quite a bit. Actually, might be a little bit easier just to, yeah, there we go. All right, so we're gonna water this down because I really want it to flow into a lot of those recesses. And I'm not trying to put on a opaque coat. This is just to add another layer of color. Mix that guy up. All right. So now I'm pretty much gonna just go ahead and slather this on. I'm gonna go ahead and pull. Oh no! Pull off some paper towel, because what we're going to do is pretty much put some on, wipe it off. Put some on, wipe it off. So we'll take this guy. Again, I'm just really trying to make sure that I get down into those recesses, especially on like these grill pieces. And I'm going to do this in sections, because I don't want to let it dry. So we'll do up through here. I'm going to take this paper towel, especially on these flat areas, I'm going to want to really wipe off the majority of it. Just letting it really hang out in those recessed bits. Nice thing about this being acrylics is that it should come off your hands fairly easily. And see how in that recessed area now, it's really starting to hit those. Burp, burp, burp. Showing off that grill type area. And we'll move on to the front. Just covering everything. Then wiping it off. All right, looks pretty good. Again, everything dries a little bit lighter than what it looks like when it's wet. So, best case scenario, put on thinner coats. If you come back after it's dried and it's not as dark as you want, you can always hit it again. But in the meantime, I've gone ahead and covered all of the different surfaces on this guy. So we're gonna go ahead and let it dry, which again, acrylics don't generally take very long. Gonna let them dry, and then we're gonna come back, see what it looks like. I may end up throwing some more of a dark wash in there. I might just leave it. Yeah, because a lot of this is actually already dried. What's gonna take a minute is some of the really thicker parts that are sitting down in those crevices. That's going to take a little bit longer to dry because most of these flat planes are already really dry already. You can always too, if some of these spots aren't quite dark enough along these lines, we'll go through as one of our end steps. We're going to go in with a little tiny brush and we can touch up some of those little edges that didn't take quite as much paint as we would have liked. So we're going to let this dry and I'll be back. All right, so went ahead and let the black wash dry, and I actually hit it with a can of a clear matte varnish, so that way I could seal in these dark layers before I go ahead and start adding some of the lighter washes back on top of it. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to go back to that pewter gray, but it's going to be a little light for what I want. So I'm going to take some of that black and darken it up a bit. Oh, actually, I have another paint. This is a sequin black, so it has some of a metallic tone to it. That way I can keep some of that shine in. Just to darken this up a bit, because that pewter is just a little bright for what I want to do. All right. That should work. And I'm going to take most of that paint off my brush. All right. Now, I'm going to start off by going in on some of these rivets to bring back a little bit of that, take away some of the black wash and brighten them up a bit, but not bringing them fully back to the highlight phase. So you're watching some of that footage and I kept screaming at myself, why are you not in frame? Make it be in frame. So let me bring back first the rivets. Okay. Now I'm going to hit actually some of these flat pewter areas. I'm going to swap over to a wider brush. And I'm actually purposefully going for one that's been abused a little bit more. So here's a, like I said, cheapy brushes. So that way I can hit some of these flat areas, just to bring back a little bit of that shine, because I got a little heavy-handed and didn't wipe off quite as much as I could have. But again, I'm still wanting to make it not take away completely all that weathering that I just put in. Just wanting to bring a little bit of that shine back. Making sure to feather that out so I don't get drastic looking lines. Just a little tiny bit of paint on my brush. Really not much at all. And I'm just gonna dust, especially for these grill portions. I'm just barely, go ahead and zoom in so you can see it a little better. I'm just going to barely dust over these portions. Like I said, just to bring a little bit of that shine back. Same thing on the chin. Chin and mouth area. Just hitting some of those high spots. We're not quite into highlight. We're just kind of bringing back a little bit of that brightness. So you can kind of see, especially on these eye pieces, a little bit more of the difference between this side and this side. It's just kind of brightened it up a little bit. And if you ever think you have a little bit too much paint on your brush, go right ahead and wipe it off and blot it on your paper towel. Same thing with this cheek. I'm just going to go in and re-hit some of those high points. That's better. All right. Whoa, wrong direction. All right. Now, like I said, I'm kind of thinking that the second part of my two-tone might be a little on the dark side. So I am going to darken up this pewter even more. So it really is more of a slate kind of gunmetal gray. Because I still want it, I like the idea of it being darker than the slate or the pewter, but I think it is just a little too dark. Now I don't even think our highlights are really even going to, ooh, that was a lot of black. I don't think our highlights are even really going to be able to bring it up to the level that I'm wanting. Okay. All right, and we're gonna test this off kind of somewhere inconspicuous to see how I feel about it first. So we're gonna test it. We'll test it back here in this cheek jaw area and see kind of how I feel about it. And what I'm probably gonna do, oh yeah, that's better, is I'm doing just a very faint coat. Now, I could, because I have an airbrush, I could go over to my airbrush and actually airbrush this layer on, and it may actually be easier to airbrush this layer on. But I kind of want to show you guys how you can do this kind of stuff without an airbrush, because I know that's something that not everybody has the space or the money to be able to get. I mean, granted, you can get some pretty decent, cheap little airbrush kits and compressors nowadays, but it's still not something that is gonna work well for everyone.